Hi, this is Tessa Keogh, and welcome to another Tuesday's tip here in the Legacy Virtual Users Group community. This is the tip for March 25th, 2014, and I thought we would cover in a little bit more detail locations in the Legacy master lists. Now, there are 4 different location lists in Legacy. We talked about the master location list in our March 18th Tuesday's tip, and I thought we'd talk about the address list today and show how you can check your location lists for both the long and the short form entries and make sure that you have them all in order. So let's get started. Now, as we've talked about before, I think it's a really good idea to make up a playground or a sample file for yourself that includes members of your own family. And this is relatively easy to do in Legacy by importing or copying a portion of a family file. And we're going to cover that in a separate Tuesday's tip. But the reason that I do this is because I like to make sure when I'm working with a sample file that I know who the people are. So this is more interesting or helpful for me to work with than a sample file that doesn't have any of the people, places, or things that are a part of my history. I'd also encourage you to limit it to perhaps 3 generations. This is a really good way to share samples or work with other people and not be concerned that maybe you're providing information which you shouldn't. I have put together a sample file that's 3 generations to use with the Legacy Virtual Users Group community, and in the dead center is Lawrence Edward and Catherine Matilda Murphy, and I've included Lawrence's parents as well as Lawrence and Catherine's children. So that's the extent of the information, and that's the file that we're going to be working with today. The first thing that you do is you can get to your locations by clicking on View and then go down to Master Lists. The first item you'll have is Address Lists, and the second item you'll have is Location. You can also see here that you have a number of other master lists that you want to go through and check and make sure you've cleaned up. Now, Legacy has some easy to work with global cleanups, but I also like to look through my lists on a regular basis just to check it myself. But I'll tell you that I usually don't work with drop-down menus. I find them kind of glitchy, and I also find that it's just easier for me to work with the icons. I'm more of a visual person, so I'd show you that first of all your master location list is going to be right here, and that brings it up with just that one click, and we can go through that in a moment. And then the other thing you can do is use the master list menu, and the first one up is the address list yet again. So it's just a quicker and easier way for me to work with things. So I'm going to show you first of all in locations, because we've been here before, the way that I have my locations set up, and you can sort in any method that you want, and you can see that Legacy actually provides for up to 9 places in your location list. So you have a lot to work with. And then it gives you predefined areas for USA sorts. And I tend to work from the largest to the smallest jurisdiction. Other people would turn that around completely, working the smallest jurisdiction to the largest, or anything in between. That's your own choice. And what I wanted to show you is if you've done this from largest to smallest, your countries are going to show up first. And then I'll show you that when I am in Canada, for instance in Vancouver City, what you'll notice is this information here in your sorted list is your long location, and your short name for that location is listed right here. And that is always shown from the smallest to the largest jurisdictions. And as you can see, I use the 2-letter code and the 3-letter codes for states or provinces. That's a 2-letter code, and for countries, that's a 3-letter code. And that's just something that I do. I like to always have the location in there. And I think I mentioned this before. I like to spell out everything because if somebody is going to be using my database or if I'm going to be putting it online or anything else, I want to make sure that there are no misunderstandings, that when I'm referring to Vancouver, in this instance, I'm referring to Vancouver, which happens to be in British Columbia, Canada. And I don't know that I have it here. But if I did have Vancouver in the state of Washington, which there is one, that would be listed here. So it's just one of those things that you want to be really clear on. So we're going to go back up to the start because I also wanted to show you how these look. You see that that's British Columbia, Canada. And I'm going to show you, for instance, Alaska. The two-letter code is AK. At the time that Cordova was used, there was no county for it. And so there's a blank there. Now, if we go down to Mendocino, California, you'll see that I have Mendocino County, the state of California, and the country is the United States. But I don't have the two-letter code here. So that's something that I either wasn't paying attention or I made an error or what have you. If I come here, you'll see that I have Ukiah, I think is how it's pronounced, in Mendocino County, California, USA. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to edit this. So we just click on edit and it brings up add or edit the location. And so I know that this one's correct here and I want to make the change in the short location. So I take out the word California and I put in the two-letter code for California and then I save it. Now it's going to ask me if I want to save that change just for that one entry or if I want to change it and fix it for every entry. So this is my master location list. I want to fix it everywhere that it occurs. But this is one of those things you're going to want to look at and make sure when you're making those corrections what you have in mind. Now I'm just going to show you really quickly that now that Mendocino County in California has been edited so that the state is a 2 code. If you were to look at Illinois, that would also show up as a 2 code. And you're going to have to believe me here. But if you were to click through on a number of these, and I would say the easiest way to work with this once you make corrections is to just highlight one and then move your arrow down and keep your eye on the short name, and it will pop out at you when you don't have the 2 or 3 letter code in there. So it's a pretty easy thing to go through and fix on a regular basis. And I would just say to go through and take a look at the beginning when you're doing data entry, maybe once a month. Once you have your master list cleaned up, you might only need to do it once a quarter or once a year. So that's how you work with your master location list. Now, the other master list that you can work with is the address list. And we're going to go down to repository first, and I'll make this a little larger too so you can follow it. The one thing that I'll mention at the beginning is that you have this arrow down key, and we're right now in repository addresses, but we could easily go to event addresses. We could also take a look at mailing addresses, and I don't have any in this particular play file, or we could ask for all addresses. So this is a good way when you're working through cleaning up your addresses, that you can take a look and clean everything up, not individually in those 3 different lists, but all together. And then you can do a number of things, whether you want to tag them or not. But I'll just show you for my purposes, and what you want to follow here is Ancestry.com is highlighted. So you see the address, the phone numbers, the URL, and if there were an email that I used for this, that could also show up there. And you'll also note that because there's an asterisk, there's a notes section. So I put a little bit of information in about whatever that address is. For instance, if we were to go down to Bayview Cemetery, the address shows up again, the phone number, the URL, and the email. And then if we were to look at notes, I have the hours of operation. I might also have a person's name if I've worked with someone in particular, certainly at a cemetery or any type of records research that I'm doing. One other thing that we could take a look at is the Nebraska Historical Society. I have the address, the phone numbers, the URL, and the email, and then I also have notes again about their location, their hours, who you should call for current information about the hours, and whether there's a cost. I also have their mailing address, and as you can see here, one of the things that I'm interested in is that they have newspapers for particular places that I'm interested in. So you can include any information you want here in your notes section, and it doesn't need to print out in your reports at all. This can be something that you unclick if you don't want the notes printed, but it's very good to include those kinds of notes if you have a map. If there's any other type of information you want about that, you can put it all in here. And of course, you could always go in here and edit if a URL changes or an email changes or a phone number, and you can also edit your notes and add more. The notes section is very robust and you should definitely take advantage of it. What I do often is just grab information from a facility's website and copy and paste it into this program, and you can always strip the HTML out and then you save your information. So that's how you can work with your addresses in Legacy. That takes care of all three of them, and then you can put it right back to only your repository address list and close out there. So I hope that proved helpful. I know everyone in the community would enjoy hearing how you work with locations, whether that's in your master location list or it's in any of your address lists. Now, if you're wondering, how do I do that in Legacy? And it might be locations, it might be something to do with a source, or any other items that you have a question about in Legacy, whether that's version 7.5 or Legacy version 8.0. Why not ask in the Legacy Virtual Users Group community? And we might just use your question in our next Tuesday's tip. That way, we can all learn together. So, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next week for another Tuesday's tip.